If you trek up a remote, overgrown hill in the jungle of Sabah, Malaysia, you might stumble across a lonely, weather-beaten gravestone. It doesn't belong to a local chief or a British colonial officer. It belongs to a New Yorker named Thomas Bradley Harris, who died right here on May 22nd, 1866. So, what was a Yankee from the 1860s doing dying in the middle of the Borneo rainforest? The clue lies in the surrounding jungle. If you clear away the thick vines, you will find man-made structures scattering the hilltop. Some of these are the ruins of Ellena, an American overseas colony established in 1866. You heard that right, an American overseas colony in 1866. So, who was this guy? And how did an American colony end up here in Borneo? One of the answers can be found nearly 9,000 miles away in Forest Hill Cemetery, just outside Boston. Buried there is another 19th century American, Joseph William Torrey. To the locals in Boston, he's just another guy from the city's industrial past. His father was in printing and journalism, which might explain why Torrey spent the 1850s bouncing around the globe looking for a story and a fortune. First chasing business in Melbourne before landing in Hong Kong to edit the China Mail. To Thomas Harris, though, Torrey was a close friend. And in 1966, these two friends accidentally set in motion a chain reaction that would ripple across centuries, reaching all the way into the modern day.
Sebelum itu kita ikuti detik cemas yang dirakam jurukamera kami Yazir Mahmud.
Visual eksklusif ini dirakam sejurus pertempuran antara anggota VAT 69 dan kumpulan penceroboh yang mengorbankan 2 orang wiranegara.
In 2013, over 200 armed militants invaded the coastal town of Lahad Datu in Sabah, sparking a bloody standoff that shocked Southeast Asia. The legal justification they claim: a series of centuries-old leases over the territory of modern-day Sabah. And one of the key links in that long chain of paper trails belongs to Joseph Torrey, a merchant from Boston who somehow convinced the Sultan of Brunei to bestow upon him the title of, quote, Rajah of Ambong and Maroodu, close quote. How did two friends manage to accidentally create geopolitical chaos that is still flaring up today? To figure that out, we have to look at the royal court of Brunei. To understand the setup, we have to rewind to the year 1660. During the reign of Sultan Muhammad Ali, a civil war broke out. The main reason, and I wish I were joking here, a high-stakes cockfight. Yes, a civil war started over a gambling match. It lasted until 1673, after which the Sultan of Sulu claimed modern-day northern Sabah as payment for his help. Fast forward 200 years to the 1860s, Sultan Abdul Mukmin is ruling Brunei, but the northern Borneo problem is still festering. Sultan Abdul Mukmin claims all of northern Borneo belongs to Brunei, but he lacks the power to police it, let alone collect taxes from it. Through a stroke of luck, Sultan Abdul Mukmin crossed paths with an American.
Hello there.
Together, the two came up with a clever plot. The Sultan of Brunei would lease a massive territory to the US representative for 10 years. On the surface, it sounds reckless. Why hand over control of your own land to total outsiders? Because for Brunei, the strategic payoff actually was huge. First is direct cash flow. The Sultan himself would receive 4,500 Spanish dollars annually. Second, political alignment. The deal also paid another 4,000 Spanish dollars to the powerful Temenggung, effectively buying his loyalty and solidifying court support. Third, outsourcing security. Brunei would save on defense costs, forcing the Americans to police and protect the territory instead. Fourth, to deter pirates.
Arr, shiver me timbers.
Heavily armed American warships patrolling the sea will secure vital merchant trade routes for Brunei. And finally, geopolitical leverage. American presence would provide a crucial counterweight against British expansion. Best of all, the lease was capped at 10 years, keeping Brunei in the driver's seat for future negotiations. It was a risky gambit, but a brilliant one. Now he just needed to find investors that are either ambitious or foolish enough to bite. On 12th of April 1861, Confederate forces fired upon Fort Sumter in South Carolina, sparking the American Civil War. A South Carolinian man named Charles Lee Moses, or as he preferred to sign his name, Silly Moses, joined the Union Navy to help save the Republic. After the war, the Lincoln administration rewarded Moses with a diplomatic title, U.S. Consul to Brunei. There was just one catch though. The position paid absolutely no salary. The US government essentially handed him an official title and told him to figure out his own side income. By 1865, Silly Moses was desperate for cash. Using his fancy new title, Silly Moses persuaded Sultan Abdul Mukmin into leasing him a massive tract of land in northern Borneo for 10 years, giving him total control over the inhabitants, all for the price of 8,500 Spanish dollars annually. But Silly Moses had zero intention of actually developing this jungle. Instead, he sat on the lease for a month, actively looking for a bigger sucker to flip it for a profit. And he found them. 2 of them, to be exact. Joseph Torrey was in Hong Kong looking for business, and Thomas Bradley Harris had also arrived trying to settle some affairs back home. Seduced by Moses' speech, Torrey, Harris, and a few wealthy Chinese and American investors formed the American Trading Company of Borneo. Now, they had no tropical farming experience, no government backing, very little capital, no real plan, but they did have that classic delusional 19th century American can-do attitude. However, any good grief needs strong brand identity. Torrey realized a lease from a shady consul wasn't enough to attract big-time investors. He needed prestige. So, Torrey went straight to the Sultan of Brunei to negotiate a corporate promotions. And remarkably, he got it. The Sultan appointed our newspaper editor from Boston as the, quote, Rajah of Ambong and Maroodu. In return, Torrey agreed to pay the Sultan 45,000 Spanish dollars over a course of 10 years, and that was only part of the bill. When you factored in royalties to Moses, pay off to the local Temenggung and cabinet members, and upfront costs, Rajah Torrey was actually on the hook for a staggering 95,000 Spanish dollars over a course of 10 years. Let the absurdity of that sink in. A regular guy from Massachusetts who had been editing newspaper in Hong Kong a few weeks prior was now legally recognized as a sovereign Eastern monarch with absolute power over a tropical territory. With his new title, our Rajah Torrey here wasted no time designing his own flag and custom coat of arms. It featured two simple circles with a star in the middle, stamped with the motto, "By God's right, we are confident." Now, let's look at the actual details of this contract, because they are terrifying. When Silly Moses got a deal, the Sultan granted him absolute authority over the local population, a power that now belonged to Rajah Torrey. Under this aggressively comprehensive contract, Torrey held the power of life and death over the inhabitants. If you were a local Dusun tribesman living there, your land suddenly belonged to an American company, well, on paper anyway. But there was just one tiny problem. Torrey was flat broke. He had staked every penny he was worth on the enterprise. His initial capital, around 10,000 Spanish dollars, came from a Hong Kong opium syndicate named Wohang, which likely wanted to turn northern Borneo into massive poppy fields. Through sheer desperate salesmanship, Torrey squeezed one final payout from his Chinese investors. He rushed to Singapore, loaded up an expedition ship with 12 Americans, 58 Chinese coolie laborers, and enough artillery to launch a small coup. Rajah Torrey then set sail for Borneo to build his capital city, Ellena. It was a beautiful name, said to have been named after his newborn daughter. Too bad it was located in a disease-ridden mangrove swamp filled with monsoons and coastal pirates looking for slave labor. While his workers were in the jungle swatting mosquitoes, dodging pirate raids, and digging for gold that did not exist, Torrey fled the swamp. He set up shop in Singapore and began aggressively spamming US Secretary of State William Seward with letters. Torrey argued that under an 1850 treaty with Brunei, the entire territory of northern Borneo was technically American private property that the US government was obligated to protect. He even pitched a wild idea. Washington could use northern Borneo as a colony of sorts to resettle recently freed slaves after the Civil War. Liberia too, if you will. All he wanted from Uncle Sam was diplomatic recognition and a US Navy gunboat to ward off the pirates. Washington's response? Complete deafening silence. They put him on red. And then everything collapsed. First, his good friend Thomas Bradley Harris contracted a tropical disease and died. Morale completely vaporized, and it doesn't help Torrey can't pay the laborers their wages. Next, C.D. Moses realized the company was defaulting on his royalties. Furious, C.D. Moses decided to launch a hostile corporate takeover. He went to Hong Kong, hired a crew of German mercenaries, and plotted an armed military raid to seize Ellena by force. When that failed, Moses went full rock consul mode, marching down the streets of Brunei town and illegally arresting his own personal creditors under the delusion that his diplomatic immunity protected him. By 1867, Rajah Torrey fled to Washington DC, drowning in debt. Now, President Andrew Johnson took one look at this absolute clown show and just shut it all down. His administration fired Moses, closed the consulate entirely, and refused to even give Torrey a meeting. Torrey's letters were dumped into the hands of a State Department legal advisor, never to be answered. Imagine His Excellency, Rajah of Ambong and Maroodu, Joseph William Torrey, sitting aimlessly in Washington DC, looking back at his life choices. His best friend was dead in a jungle grave. Ellena was swallowed up by the swamp. The crops failed, no gold was found, and the President of the United States wanted nothing to do with him. On top of that, he was being hunted by the Sultan of Brunei and local river traders for unpaid bills. In July 1869, Torrey declared bankruptcy. He started paying off his debt by managing a sugar refinery in Hong Kong. The American colony was dead. The settlement was gone. But Joseph Torrey was still legally the Rajah of Ambong and Maroodu. Broke, defeated, but holding a golden ticket. Torrey realized that even if he could not build an empire, he could still sell those papers to someone else. The list was still alive, and it was just waiting for the next investor to buy it. Okay, so that took way longer than I thought. Alright, so the video is finished, and the rest of this is just me explaining the sources. There will be not much editing here, maybe just a bit of music, and me talking to my 16 subscribers over here. Okay, so the source for this video, at least 80% of it came from Professor Stephen Press's Rock Empire. Chapter 1, I think. Like, most of it came from this book. Except for a few. That's why I need to make this addendum, I think. Now, first, Professor Press wrote in his book that C.D. Moses had to pay both the Sultan and the Temenggung $9,500 with only the agreements as the source. However, when I look up at both of the agreement, which I actually have over here, the Sultan demands 4,500 and the Temenggung demand 4,000. So it adds up to $8,500. So for this particular figure, I did not use Professor Press's books. Secondly, this book actually do not mention anything about Thomas Bradley Harris. I actually managed to track down Thomas Harris's to the Whitney family from the US states of Connecticut. This book over here, published in 1878. Volume 1 over here, which has thankfully been digitized by Google. On page 407 and 408, we can read a brief excerpt on Thomas Bradley Harris here. Now the third one is the drug syndicate Wohang, which funded the early part of this ridiculous adventure. These lots are very hard to find info on, not even the Chinese sources. But I did manage to find a recent PhD thesis that talk about this. So Wohang have a monopoly on opium, and the boss for it was someone named Chen Takwang. So as for this picture of Takwang, I actually found it by accident whilst browsing the Eastern Window by Louis Fonseca. She identifies this gentleman as Tak Chong. Now fourth, for the letters, I mainly take them from the US National Archive that is available for free for everyone. Now, if you have watched the video, you'll notice a few parts that seem to have been aggressively cut out. Yes, there were two that has been aggressively cut out. Now, first, the deal between the Sulu and Brunei Sultanate in 1673. This one is a doozy. I've spent 10 hours trying to make head of tails of it and just get more questions. So alright, so the common narrative is that the Sulu got northern Borneo in 1673 after the Brunei Civil War. I read the Silsilah Brunei and a few other books written by Westerners and was about to conclude that yeah, there was agreement signed on 1673. Then came this annoying British guy. One British writer, Alexander Dalrymple, wrote this book over here. I have it. It actually talked about the Treaty of Münster. I don't know what that is, so like, what is that? Now, turns out it is the peace deal for the 80 Years' War. Okay, so I do know a bit about that, which was the war between the Spanish and the Dutch. Then this guy wrote in his book, quite blasé, oh, the Sulu got the Northern Borneo land agreement in the year 1704. Like, why? Why is there one more that I need to keep track of? So I cannot in good conscience continue that part of the video and had to cut it. So I did not mention an agreement, and I only mentioned that the Sulu claim the Northern Borneo land and leave it at that. It's technically correct. Now second, okay, so next is that the Temenggung in this video had cheekily claimed that Pulau Palawan belonged to him, which now belong to Rajah Torrey. So Thomas Harris actually tried to be diplomatic with the Spanish and was like, excuse me, this land belong to us now? The gall of that nerd. Can't help but to admire it. The Spanish replied with a bunch of big warship, just to send a clear message. That part I had to cut out because it made things look confusing in retrospect. The last thing I need is to insert another great power into the video. So alright, so that is from me. Bye.